So I would just like to preface this and say that I'm normally a very calm human being and I don't usually get upset about much, but this guy takes the cake. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I decided to do a storytime video about how I got my sociology professor fired not my first semester, but my second semester, my first year at school. So it's a kind of a wild ride. I actually had to write everything down, that way I had everything in my brain so I could make this coherent video, but you know what? Let's just jump right in and we'll see what happens. So this begins at the beginning of spring semester, so like in January. And I was taking sociology. It was one of my prereq courses, like general ed, whatever you want to call it, and I had to take the sociology class. And this was one that I really didn't want to take, but like I had to, so whatever. And I was talking to my advisor, and we were like setting up my classes, and she was like, well, the only slot that we have available is Monday, Wednesday, Friday at what time? 2 to like 3:15 or something like that. And she's like, does that work for you? And I'm like, yeah, that works fine. I have to be to work at 3:30, so you know what? And I had never heard of him. My other friends had taken sociology the semester before, and they were like, do not take this other professor, don't take him. So when my advisor told me that I was gonna get this guy, I'm gonna call him Dr. Pickle, just so there's like, we have a name to go with the horrifying experience. So Dr. Pickle was available, but the other professor my friends had warned me about was all booked up, and I was like, whew, thank God I won't have to deal with him. He sounds like a nightmare. I'm glad I have Dr. Pickle. I was very young and naive. Very young and naive. So school starts, like we actually get in, and the first day of classes we actually have a snow day. Like there's a huge blizzard, we ended up not going in. The first day of class was on a Wednesday, so I don't go back into school until Friday. But he emails us all again, Dr. Pickle, and he goes, hey, so I decided we're not having classes on Friday, we're just gonna do Monday and Wednesday. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, because since the class goes to like 3:15, I'm still getting the same amount of like credit hours, so like it should be fine. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I don't meet this guy until the Monday after school has already started. And I get in there and everything seems fine. He's this cute little old man, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be great. And he spends the entire class teaching us how to use Blackboard, which is what the website is that we use for our homework. And this is pretty like standard, like most teachers on the first day of classes will teach you how to access your homework, and I'm like, okay, whatever. But like usually most teachers don't spend 2 weeks, like the first 2 weeks of class, talking about how to access homework. Usually there's some teaching going on. In fact, most of my classes, like the first day, like syllabus day, or syllabus week or whatever, everyone's like, oh yeah, you just get your syllabus and it's all fine. No, most of my teachers were like, here's your syllabus, here's the first lesson, you have homework due next week. And I'm like, okay, but this guy spent 2 full weeks teaching us about how to access our homework. And I was like, okay, he's older, like whatever, I'll suck it up and deal with it. But this was just the beginning of many, many problems I had with this guy. So the next thing that he would always do is cancel class on us. So he would cancel for like the stupidest reasons. So he would be like, oh, hey, on Monday, he would say, hey, I heard that there's a storm coming on Wednesday, which means I'm gonna cancel class right now, even though the school hasn't canceled class. He's like, even if the school does cancel class, or doesn't cancel class, like they think it's fine, the weather's fine, I'm still canceling class because I don't want to drive in that weather. And I'm like, okay, that's one thing if you want to cancel class, but it's a whole nother thing if you assign us makeup homework and count us as absent if we don't show up to class because you cancel. Another thing that he would do is he'd give us a syllabus and he would change it without telling us. And it wasn't like an online syllabus that we could like check like day to day and see whatever changes he made. No, it was like a paper. He gave us a paper and then he would change it, and then he'd be like, oh yeah, this was due 2 weeks ago. And we're like, not on the paper, it's not. And he's like, yeah, well, I didn't tell anyone, but yeah, I changed it. It's still counted as late though. And I'm that kid who gets everything done ahead of time, but even I was like falling behind in this class. And so that was stressful for me. And then the homework portion of it was weird. So every 2 weeks we wouldn't have a class on Wednesday, and instead we would have an online test. These online tests took about 60 minutes to complete. A lot of the times the test covered subjects that we hadn't even covered in class yet because we really covered nothing in class. Like he didn't do anything in class except for talk to us about his marriage counseling days as a psychiatrist, and we don't care about that. We're in sociology, not marriage counseling. So we would take these tests and we would have no idea what we were doing, but somehow we would like pass them. And the way he did it is, so we couldn't just take the test once. We couldn't just take the test twice. We had to take it twice. Otherwise, we wouldn't get a grade on it at all. Most of the time, teachers will say, hey, you have two chances to get a good grade. But after that, whatever your highest grade is will be the one we take. The way he did it was, you have to take 2 tests, and then he's gonna take the 2 grades, put them together, average it out, and that's your final grade. That is crazy, because if you take the test the first time and you get an 80 on it, and you take it the second time and you get a 100, your grade is still gonna be lower than a 100 because he averaged it out, and that's stupid. And another thing that he would do is, he wouldn't know how to use the technology that he required us to use to turn in our homework. Like one time, I turned in an essay that I wrote, which for the record, all the essays we wrote were criticizing other kids' homework. So there was a discussion board and you'd have to post like a thought or whatever about the reading every single week. And our essays were taking 3 of those and criticizing them. And these were all other students' ideas, and really what we were doing was grading them. We were grading other kids' ideas on sociology. And I'm like, to me, that's stupid, because I don't know anything about sociology. You're supposed to be teaching us. Why are we the ones grading? But anyway, so I would do these, and I turned one in, and he gave me a 0 on it. And I had never received a 0 on any project ever. And I was like, this is so weird. And so I looked at his comment that he made on my assignment, and he said, your assignment was too difficult to find, so I'm giving it a 0. And I was like, what? So the next day in class, I came up and I was like, hey, I saw that you gave me a 0 because you said it was too difficult to find. Like, how could you not find it? I submitted it to the section that you told us to submit it to. I checked, it's on there. Why couldn't you find it? And he's like, yeah, it's a blank document. This boy. So I clicked on it and I scrolled one time, and you can see that there's multiple pages. So I don't know why he couldn't see that there were multiple pages to scroll up, but I scrolled up once and there was my document. I'm like, okay, because I typed it up on like a Word document or whatever, and when I submitted it, it formatted it slightly differently, so there was an extra blank page at the top. So I get that might be a little confusing, but like, dude, there was a number page, like a page count right there, just scroll up. So he was like, oh yeah, so I see that, yeah, you have it, you have to resubmit it so I can read it. And I'm like, you can read it right here. So I had to resubmit it, and it took him 3 weeks to grade it. And I finally got a 100. And I'm like, okay, take a breath, maybe he's just whatever. But I was so angry about that because he just had to scroll up, and he gave me a big fat goose egg. Instead of saying, hey, I couldn't find it, could you explain where this is? He was like, let me grade it first and then I'll get back. So another thing that was super, super annoying was his idea on class participation. Again, this isn't even the story yet. This is just build up and context and frustrations leading up to the story. So his idea of class participation in his syllabus said, you don't speak, you don't raise your hand, you don't ask questions, you don't do anything like that. You sit, you write little notes on your notepad. You're not allowed to have computers, you're not allowed to have any kind of technology out on the table at all. So a lot of kids take notes on their laptops or iPads or whatever. You're not allowed to do that. You have to use a piece of paper, a single piece of paper. You can't even use a notebook. You have to have a single piece of paper and a pencil. That's the only thing you're allowed on your desk. And you have to write whatever he's saying, and you have to pay attention to him. This one girl, so he liked to use slides on like a projection screen. This one girl brought in the actual textbook, like the physical textbook, because she printed out some of the pages or whatever, and she liked to read it on her desk instead of like looking at the screen because it hurt her eyes, whatever. Totally understandable, nothing wrong with that at all. Most teachers would be totally 100% fine because then she can make notes in the notebook or in her like textbook as they're going along, and it's better for her. So no, I don't know a single teacher besides this guy who would have a problem with that. He gets angry at her because she's not staring at him the whole time. She's looking at the textbook. He gets angry at her because she's highlighting things and writing stuff down in the little margins. Like, that's what he gets angry with her about. And I'm like, what? Keep in mind, this girl was like the best student in the class, like the best student, because she would always bring up really good sociology points. She would get a class discussion going. We'd all be talking, and he would get angry at us because we were discussing things like racism and social economics and things like that that were actually built, you know, that were actually part of sociology, and we weren't talking about his marriage counseling days. And I was like, what? So now I'm getting into the point of the story where I start to lose my mind. So this is about halfway through the semester. All this other stuff has happened in the first half of the semester. This is the second half. And this is where it starts getting like really bad. So keep in mind, all the stuff that I just talked about happens throughout the entirety of the semester, but this is when it's like all those little frustrations and all those like moments start to like really, they start to eat at my soul a little bit, just a little bit. But this is where I start getting to the point where I'm like, this is not okay at all. So we get to the section in our sociology textbook that is talking about racism and like perceptions of people and things like that, which is a sociology topic, so we have to talk about it. This guy, who for the record is like the whitest dude you will ever meet in your life, whiter than I am, and that's saying something. He tells all of us, because in his neighborhood there was not one single occurrence of racism, he tells us that racism in the United States is dead. That not a single human being in the United States is racist. First of all, false. I mean, for crying out loud. And so then every kid in the class started bringing up examples of things that had happened to their friends, things that have happened to them, things that have happened to people that, you know, their family members or whatever else. And he was like, no, racism is dead. So yeah, he thinks racism is dead. So that was like kind of a huge no-no for me, because I was like, that's stupid. Like, and you call yourself a sociologist. And then that same class period, he started using racial slurs. And he's not telling us this to be like, don't say these things, that's not okay. He's using these slurs in normal conversation. And we're like, stop. So he brings up religion in class one time, and I'm Christian, and like I get that like there's, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so he starts talking about Christianity, and he's like bringing up like really like, I don't know, he's saying things that like aren't true, and like just really degrading things about Christians and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, usually I wouldn't say a word because like whatever, like people have had it worse, and I just don't say anything. But this guy was already like, I was already furious about the whole racist situation, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna say something. So he brings up that, and I raised my hand, and I'm like, hey, I actually think you have it wrong, this is the way it really is. And he was like talking about stuff like doctrine and things like that he was getting completely wrong. And I raised my hand, and I was like, that's actually not true. And I like bring up like all these passages, and I like talk to him about like how it really is, and he's like, he gets so angry at me for doing this. After this, he gets so angry at me, everything that I turned in, he would give me like a 0 on. And I'm like, excuse me? And he was so angry at me, like everything was a 0. And I was like, that's so unfair, because everything I'd been turning into at that point had been good quality, and I'd still continued the same quality, and he'd been giving me decent grades on all of them, and then because I questioned him. And so this was all building points. And finally it gets to finals week. Are you ready for this? So finals week comes up, and I'm already stressed because I have so many projects due, I have so many things, and he tells us that we have 2 finals to do. Technically, there are 2 parts to the same final, but they're big enough projects that they could be considered 2 totally separate things. He says for each project, it should take us about 6 to 7 hours to complete. We have a single week to complete both of them, and we still have all of our other classes to do this for. We have no idea what he's asking of us, so we're pretty much going into this blind. Basically what he's asking us to do is, the first part, let me talk about the first part. He tells us that we have to calculate our own grade. Basically, and it's not like, oh, you go through and you give yourself an A. No, you have to calculate how many, like, whatever points he gave you for each thing, add it all up, divide it by this number, do this. He had 13 pages of a form that he sent us all, and we had to fill out this form. 13 pages, and he called it taxes for your grades, and that's really what it was. You fill out line A, and then you combine it with line C, and then you bring it over to line D, and if you got this for line E, then you bring it up to line this, and Lord grant me patience. So I was doing all this and I finally completed it and I was like, oh my gosh, I finally finished it, and I send it in. A day later, he grades it, sends it back to me, and it's a 0. And he writes, yeah, everything looked great except for one thing. You misadded this. First of all, I didn't even know what the heck I was doing. He's like, you added this incorrectly, and just fix that. Yeah, that's all you need to fix. And I was like, wait, hold up. So because I missed one small little piece of the entire 13 pages, you're giving me a 0? That's not quite how grading works. Grading is not like a light switch. It's not on or off. It's not 0 or 100. It's not binary. It's, hey, you did most of the work. Everything's pretty much 100% okay. You miss one little piece, you get a 97 or a 98 or heck, even a 99. Like, you get something a little bit lower than a 100. And I would have been okay with a 99 or a 98 or a 97. But he gave me a 0. And I was like, okay, no. So that made me, I was sitting in my bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, stressing over all my projects, trying to study, and I'm sitting in my bed and I get this back and I'm reading it and I'm sitting there and I'm just sobbing my eyes out, like sobbing, because I was already working all the time. I was doing my internship. I was doing all 6 of my classes, trying to get all the projects done. My computer had just crashed with all my projects on it, so I had to redo some of them. And I'm sitting in the bed and I don't have time for this, so I am sobbing. Just sobbing. And that's when I kind of snapped and I was like, I don't care what it takes, I'm getting this guy kicked out, because this is like everything that he had done up to this point. He is a trash teacher. And I haven't even told you about the second project that we had to do. So that's just the first project. So I finally refinished it, I sent it in, and he takes so long to grade it. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gonna wait till after the grades are in, so I'm not even gonna get full credit for this, whatever. So I'm freaking out. But anyway, so he tells us to do the second project. The second project is we have to create a website. That's right, a website. This is not web design class, this is not anything like that, this is sociology. We have to create our own website, and we have to label it like our e-portfolio for sociology. Copy and paste 5 of our personal homeworks, 5 of other kids' homeworks, 5 of his written instructions, which for the record were like very, very few. I had to actually search for the written instructions, like hardcore search everything on his website, trying to find something that I could post on this my personal website. So we had to create this whole thing. We had to have 5 of each thing. We had to write a paragraph for each of those 5. So it would be like 5 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs. So 15 paragraphs in all we had to write, and they had to be like full-length paragraphs. It couldn't be just like 3 sentences and done. It had to be like a full paragraph, and it had to be just elaborating on what you had learned. So the homework that we were submitting had been stuff that we had done like at the beginning of the semester, and now we had to elaborate on whatever points that we had covered then about, and just like explain like how much we had learned since that time, which for the record, I had learned nothing, so I really had nothing to write, but I had to really pull some stuff out of my brain because I was losing my mind. So I finally finished it, I submitted it, and he goes, oh, this looks great. The only reason why he said it looked great was because I got everything done. He didn't even read any of it, because if he had, he would have seen that I had written how much of a trash teacher he was. But you know what? He didn't read any of it, I don't care, he just scrolled through. But that's what really ticks me off, is that I did so much work for this class. I spent like hours on this one project alone, and he didn't even read it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So that was so frustrating to me. And he finally grades my first project, and he gives me a decent grade. But still, because he had given me so many zeros before, I was like, like my grade was so low, and I was like, this is not okay. So I went, this is where I snapped. So I went to all the kids that I had known who had taken his class. There were kids who were no longer taking his class. There were kids who were about to graduate. There were kids who were like in other classes with me, who had a class with him at a different time. So I had about maybe 60 students that I was talking to. There was a lot of kids. And they all loathed this guy. Like, they hated him so much. I talked to all the kids in my class with him. They all hated him. And I said, hey, I'm going to type up every single thing that he's ever done to any of us. So everyone was giving me all the things that he had done to them. I typed it all up in like a professional looking document, and I printed it out, and we all signed it. So there were like 60 signatures on this thing. And I went to the dean of students and I said, hey, this guy is trash. And I showed it to her, and I was like, this is all the stuff he's done. This was like 3 or 4 pages worth of like typed up documents. and then there was another page of like signatures. And I was like, I stapled it all together, made it look professional, and I was like, here you go. This is a problem. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is like an issue. We're gonna look into this. So she looks into it, and I am not hearing anything back. But then I check my grades, and all the grades that he had previously like calculated or whatever and given me like zeros on, he then gave me like 100th on all of them. So I was like, that's really weird. And I talked to some of the other kids, and that he had given low grades to as well, and they all got really high ones as well. So I was like, okay, he's switching all the grades. What does that mean? And then classes end, all of our grades are in, we get an A in the class, everything's fine. A couple weeks later, I hear from a friend of mine who actually works at the school. She's like an assistant to one of the professors, and she heard that he had actually been fired. And so we were all like, oh my gosh. So I was very happy, and I actually looked him up on LinkedIn, and I found him. This was actually by accident. I found him on LinkedIn, and he's trying to make his own private practice as a marriage counselor. Yeah, I wish him luck. Anyway, so that's basically how I got my sociology teacher fired. He was total trash, totally racist, unprofessional, a pain in the butt teacher, confusing, and just a horrible human being, causing his students way too much stress for the amount of work that he was giving us in the class. It was just insane. So that's my story. I don't recommend trying to get your teachers fired, because that will probably get, I don't know, people will probably be like, you're that kid. But if you have enough people backing you up, I don't think people are going to look at you as that kid. People are going to look at you as, hey, there actually is a problem and they did something to fix it. So definitely stand up for what you believe in, but just be careful. Cautionary tale. Nothing bad came out of this one. Actually, something good came out of this one, but just want to put that out there to be careful. But stand up for yourself. Don't let teachers, just because they have the power, do whatever the heck they want to. There are people who are willing to listen, and if you get enough people backing you up, you can get a loud enough voice that you will be heard. So keep that in mind as you're going into the next school year, or if you're starting school for the first time. Just keep that in mind that, yeah, there are trash teachers out there, but there are things that you can do to help yourself, to help others, to figure something out. So anyway, that's my story for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's kind of a long video, I apologize for that. But if you liked it, give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. I make new videos every Tuesday and Thursday, and I'll see you guys all in a few days. Bye.